Hey guys! So we've been talking about sexual and asexual reproduction, as you know. Yesterday you all had, the back of your do now, you had an assignment where you were supposed to do the Venn diagram like this. So today I'm going to go over how to do that, how to fill it out, the compare and contrast sexual and asexual reproduction. So I'm going to type it on here so it's a little easier for you to read rather than hold up the paper. So asexual reproduction, as we all know, is just with one parent, whereas sexual reproduction has two parents. So with that being said, that means that with asexual reproduction, your offspring or the child is going to be identical to the parent. In sexual reproduction, we know that the offspring is going to be different from the parent, and it's 50% of the DNA comes from mom, 50% of the DNA comes from dad. So we talked about how you get the egg from your mom, the sperm from the male or the dad, and then they come together and fertilize and form the offspring. So offspring is 50% mom's DNA, and 50% dad's DNA. All right. Asexual. Another thing about asexual reproduction is that asexual reproduction is good because it takes less time for reproduction. So that's actually a good thing for organisms that use asexual reproduction because they can reproduce more and it doesn't take them as much time. Whereas with sexual reproduction, it takes more time for reproduction, as you all know. For humans, it can take 9 months, or it takes up to 9 months for the child to be born. In some animals, like elephants, it can be almost 2 years for the baby. No thanks. Another thing about asexual reproduction is that because all of the offspring are identical to their parents, then you end up with less diversity, which this can be a bad thing because if one of the parents has, or if the parent has something like cancer or something that it kills it, then it's going to pass that on to its identical offspring, and then that offspring will also have the same thing, and then eventually that's all there will be, and then they will die. So that can be very bad. Sexual reproduction, though, provides more diversity because we have a mixing of the DNA. So because you're getting 50% from mom and 50% from dad, you can kind of hide some of those genes or DNA that cause bad things to happen. In asexual reproduction, it also uses less energy. So this is really good because it can help the organisms use asexual reproduction because they don't have to use as much of their energy in reproduction. Whereas with sexual reproduction, it takes more energy, so it requires a lot more of the organism. Another good thing for asexual reproduction is that you can have more offspring at one time. So that can be good for the organisms that use asexual reproduction. Think of like mushrooms, right? If you've ever seen like a ring of mushrooms and there's like the whole ring around them, that's because the mushroom just shoots out a bunch of spores and then a whole bunch of mushrooms pop up around it. So a lot of times things that use asexual reproduction are very small, and that's because they need to have a lot of organisms at once so that they can survive. With sexual reproduction, you guys should know just from human experience that you have less offspring at one time. So as you know, most humans usually get pregnant with just 1 to 2 babies, and dogs have less than probably 8 at a time and things like that. One other thing I want to mention are the types of asexual reproduction and the types of sexual reproduction. So there are a few different ways that things can go through asexual reproduction. One way is through budding, which you should have already saw in the video that you watched last week. Another way is through binary fission. And another way is through fragmentation. And then, as I mentioned, mushrooms use spores. So if you don't know what those are, then make sure that you go back and review that video that's on Google Classroom so that you can look at those. For sexual reproduction, really the only types are fertilization, which is what most things that you would think of use. And then, of course, we've talked about pollination when it comes to flowering plants. All right, so those are the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. So there we've contrasted the two types. To compare the types or give the similarities, we have that both, of course, are methods of reproduction, obviously. Both involve passing DNA to their offspring. So that's important because that's how we get different DNA and things. And then another similarity, which is kind of similar to the first, is both create a new organism. All right, so those should cover all of the differences and similarities between asexual and sexual reproduction. Make sure that you write those on your Venn diagram or take your own notes on a separate sheet of paper. You will be required to explain or compare and contrast asexual and sexual reproduction, and you want to make sure that you're able to easily do that. See you next time.